I'm just going to welcome everyone here today. John did the welcome last week. I'm Ashley Rosenberger. I also work at ASABL as the admissions manager. So my role is to just work with our students to get them here at our Great Lakes campus or at the Great Lakes campus over the summer. And it's really been a privilege to work at ASABL. I was an ASABL alumni, or I am an ASABL alumni. And so I've worked with Stephen Bouma-Prediger in a different context, but I actually ran the Belize program a few years ago and worked with him in that.
Can't hear you.
I think you just muted yourself.
I muted myself. Sorry, my kids just busted in my cabin, so I accidentally muted myself. I'm currently in the Black Hills at the Wheaton College Science Station. So my husband works out here, so it's cool to be able to partner both places and see what the Lord's doing in these different contexts. And they're being really loud right now. So John, I'm gonna let you take over, John, because my kids are going crazy in my cat.
All right. Well, we love you and we love your children. And with that, why don't we just get started and turn it over. Thanks everybody for being here. We're grateful that you take this hour to join us. And I'll turn it over to Stephen Bouma-Prediger, who will lead us through the second session. Thanks, Steve, again for doing this. I really appreciate you.
You're welcome, John. It's a pleasure. And again, my welcome to everyone who's joined us for this 1-hour class session. Let me, as we did last week, let me begin with a prayer. Let's pray. Good and loving Lord, teach us what we need to know and show us what we need to do to be faithful followers of your Son, Jesus, especially as we strive to be caretakers of this, our home planet. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Just a brief recap. Last week, for those of you who weren't here, I focused on what reasons Christians have to serve, protect, and restore, to use the language from the ASABL Institute. Serve, protect, and restore our home planet. The topic was, why should Christians care for creation? And I literally took a chapter out of my book, For the Beauty of the Earth, chapter 7, that summarizes 10 reasons why people should care for creation. What I'd like to do today is focus in on the question, what ecological virtues do we need? What kind of people do we need to be to properly care for the earth and its many creatures? What virtues must we embody to be earth keepers in our homes, schools, churches, workplaces, neighborhoods, cities? So that'll be the focus of my attention in our discussion for today. I'd like to begin, as I did last week, with a poem, also from Wendell Berry. He doesn't give any titles, so I presume maybe the opening line of the poem would be a suitable title. This is from his book, one of his 2 hardback collections of self-curated poems over his lifetime. This is from This Day, collected in New Sabbath poems. The first line is, as timely as a river. As timely as a river, God's timeless life passes into this world. It passes through bodies, giving life, and past them, giving death. The secret fish leaps up into the light and is again darkened. The sun comes from the dark. It lights the always passing river, shines on the great branched tree, and goes. Longing in dark, we are completely filled with breath of love in us, forever incomplete. God's Holy Spirit in and with and among us, the breath of love in us, but forever incomplete. All right, writing exercise time. Yeah, I'm an unreconstructed English professor in addition to a religion and environmental studies professor. So if you have something to write with and write on, I hope nearby, a little exercise to get us going, and then we'll talk about it. Relax, there are no grades. And you're not gonna be compelled to share what you write, but simply a little piece of paper and a pen or pencil, nothing fancy. And I'd simply, first, there's two parts. First part, simply think about a person you know, preferably you know personally, or maybe someone you know about, who you consider to be a moral exemplar for earthkeeping or creation care. Someone you look up to. And again, preferably someone you know personally, maybe not famous person, who you see as a model earthkeeper. And just jot that person's name, or maybe more than one, maybe two or three people, but at least one. Jot that person's name down on that piece of paper. I'll give you a minute to think about that and write down the name. Part two. Now list the character traits that you see in the person whose name is on your piece of paper. Specifically, what virtues does this person exhibit? This model or exemplar earthkeeper. And just jot them down. Again, just, two or three words, more if you can, but at least two or three character traits, positive character traits that are virtues, not vices. Try to finish up if you haven't already. Okay, let's talk about what you wrote. You don't have to reveal any names, but some brave soul get us started. Just mention a virtue or two, a character trait or two that you find in someone who you see as a model or exemplar of earthkeeping.
Empathy.
All right, who said that?
The Halls.
Okay. Say some more about empathy.
Feeling. and thinking about what other creatures and other people are caring about and how they feel and what will help them to be fruitful.
Okay. M, pathos, to feel with, sort of the Greek version of compassion, compassio, to feel with in Latin. So empathy. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Someone else have a character trait.
I would say one is dedication.
Okay, Gene, say some more.
Yeah, I'll actually mention the name of the person, Bill Ahern from Greenville. Since the first year I came here in 2001, excuse me, he was a department chair, and he's always been consistent about how the university should be concerned about the environment, recycling, the things that they did with the White Center. And even now, 20 years later, he's still fighting the cause for concern for the environment, getting others to see these things. He never stopped that. I don't know if he's gotten the fruit of the labor.
So,
But he's never stopped sowing the seed. And so I find that inspiring.
So dedication through thick and thin over decades, literally. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Someone else, character trait.
Yeah, hey everyone. I just wanted to share the person that came to my mind immediately. I hope everyone has had a chance to interact with, and that's Dr. Joseph Sheldon. He was one of my professors at Messiah College, now university. And I agree with Jean, dedication was definitely one of the traits that came to my mind. But when I think of Dr. Sheldon, I think of integrity. I think of follow through, and that he is truly living everything that he teaches. He's the one that introduced me to Ensemble, got me out to Whidbey Island for classes. I think that he said his home was one of the first LEED certified houses in Washington. And at 80 plus years old now, he's still serving at Pacific Rim Institute. And I am just amazed at not only his dedication, but his integrity and passion.
Thank you, Leanne. Many of us, I think, know Joe over the years. I first met him down in Belize with the Creation Care Study Program. And we've known each other for a long time. And all that you say is true. Real person of integrity, pioneering, lover of nature. And I learned more birds, I think, with Joe, just a few days in Belize than I have most any other time in my life. So thank you.
Yep.
I want to chime in too, because he was the person I wrote down.
Oh boy.
So there's definitely a Joe Sheldon fan club.
Okay.
I wrote him down too, right?
Yeah. So, no, but yeah, like, I mean, for me, like, he was the first person, like, he's my mentor, like my lifetime mentor, but he's the first person who I really like witnessed caring for creation, not just like, I learned from him that you don't just care for creation by like the vocation that you do, like ecology, environmental science, but actually like you take it home with you. And so I see humility and patience in him. Like I learned, like he was growing potatoes at Pacific Rim, and he was living off the land, and like he did have the sustainable home, but he just had so much patience, like he would plan ahead. He was just so humble, because I'm like, you're retired. Like I hear about retirement. I grew up in the city, so when people talk about retirement, they're going on vacation. Retirement for him was to be in the creation and to live sustainably and to just keep doing what he does all the time. Just keep living a life for the Lord. But I just, but like consistent, humble and patient and reliable, and that's like his personality with people, and not just how he but also with the creation and everything he does.
it's authentic and thoroughgoing. It's not just something he puts on at work or with people. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got 2 votes for Joe. Are there any other folks here that have Joe Sheldon as the person you identified as your Earthkeeping exemplar?
I did as well.
Okay.
The 2 words that I'll just were patience and humility. Those were my first 2 words for him. So I echo Veronica. And being a student at Messiah and at Pac Rim and going out in a boat with him collecting crabs, I really just appreciated his authentic life and his humility towards the creation.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Someone else? A character trait?
The first person that came to mind, oh, sorry.
That's all right, go ahead.
The first person that came to mind is a fellow by the name of Leo Finkenbinder.
Oh, yes.
Leo, I've had the pleasure of working with Leo for 10 years
Uh-huh.
and reaped the benefits of his teaching the Chacon family about sustainability. And so some of the things that I wrote down were the fact that Leo was faith-filled. There's not an area of his life that his faith was not based on. And kindness. He was so kind and respectful of all the people that he worked with, students and Chacons and faculty members. He significantly affected my life.
Oh, wonderful. Kindness, respect, personal integrity, a sense of his faith affecting all that he is and does. Those are all wonderful character traits. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Who else was, jumping in here? Just
hi. I wrote down a number of the same words that have been mentioned. There's another one on my list that I put, which is scientific. Because I think that the person that I'm thinking of in particular, and the people, I guess, that I'm thinking of, interestingly, they've all been academics and they've been scientists. So, and the one person who combined the big list, including science, but also Christianity, is actually Cal DeWitt, who I was a graduate student of a long time ago. And so life is interesting because I've lost touch with Cal, but been kind of brought back into his circle. So when you asked the question last week or had us think about it, really the combination of humble, wise, Christian, seeking Jesus, and with a very inquisitive mind that uses kind of the scientific method. Those are the things that came to my mind.
Thank you very much, Douglas, and very appropriate given that this is an event, this little mini class, through the Al Sabal Institute that was one of the loves of Cal's life and as one of the co-founders. Thank you. Last call. Anyone else want to jump in here with a virtue or 2 that you wrote down?
I wrote down loves the earth and loves God, so very basic.
Okay. Love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbors as ourselves, to quote the condensation of the Torah that Jesus gives us in the Gospels, the 2 great commandments. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Natalie.
I also had honesty on my list. Honesty, looking at the significance of their actions, the actions needed to live, so to provide food and shelter, but also that those actions will have effects, sometimes negative, sometimes positive, on the surrounding environment, and being aware that as part of their living, that they are having this effect, and being really honest with those consequences and using that as a way to judge their actions. So on my list was honesty.
Okay. Good or bad, being honest about what we're doing, the consequences, etc. Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay, let me share my screen and talk a little bit about ecological virtues. What ecological virtues do we need? Well, we have much in the Bible actually to think about when it comes to this. Perhaps what comes to the minds of many are the fruit of the Spirit. In Paul's love letter to the church at Galatia, chapter 5, he lists love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. If we had more time, I'd take a little look at each one of those. Love is agape, joy is chara. That's my middle daughter's name. That's where we got her name, Chi Alpha Rho Alpha in Greek, C-H-A-R-A. Peace is eirene, which is the Greek version of shalom in Hebrew. So anyway, this is a rich, rich list of virtues, of habitual dispositions to act excellently, to use Aristotle's short definition of what a virtue is. And if we're honest, we would say, while we strive to embody these, we often fall short. But nevertheless, it's a lovely place to start. The world and the church in particular would be a very different place, I think, if we embodied these more of these virtues more often. We can also learn from the ancient Greeks, as the church tradition has done. The cardinal virtues you find in Plato and Aristotle are self-control, courage, wisdom, and justice. In the Christian tradition, starting with people like Augustine and especially later on Thomas Aquinas, these four cardinal virtues, cardinal like the hinges on a door. The door can't open without those hinges being in place. That's sort of the necessary virtues. These virtues morphed into temperance, fortitude, prudence, and justice. Self-control became temperance, courage, more than just courage in battle for soldiers, but became fortitude. Wisdom became known as prudence, and justice stayed more or less as justice. And to those four virtues that the Christian tradition stole from Plato and Aristotle were added the three theological virtues that St. Paul gives us: faith, hope, and love. And 4 + 3 = 7, which is the biblical number of perfection or completion. So in the Christian tradition, we have these 7 important virtues, the 4 cardinal virtues and the 3 so-called theological virtues of faith, hope, and love. Last but not least, we have the 7, again, that number 7, symbolizing completion, 7 deadly sins or vices, and their corresponding virtues: chastity and lust, temperance and gluttony, love and greed, diligence and sloth, patience, wrath, kindness, envy, humility, and pride. We could, I'm sure, spend a whole class just talking about this list and why some of those virtues to our more modern or postmodern eyes seem a bit strange, perhaps. Patience and wrath, humility and pride. Okay, I get that. What about love and greed? In any case, we have these, at least these 3 pockets of tradition, as well as the biblical tradition, at our disposal to talk about virtues and vices. Let me talk about virtue ethics and virtue ethics. And the first point here is simply this: while obligations and consequences are important in ethics, I think concern for virtues is even more important. The most pressing ethical question in my mind, and I'm a part of a group of ethicists, probably still in the minority among professional scholars, but a growing group, say the most pressing ethical question is not what are my duties, the fancy term for that approach to ethics is called deontology, or what are the consequences, the fancy name for that is teleology, but rather what kind of person should I be? The fancy name for that, again, borrowing from Greek, the Greek etymology is aretiology, the logos of verite, the study of virtue. So I think we would emphasize character rather than conduct. Obligations, duties, rights, consequences all have to do with conduct. And some folks are saying we need, yeah, it's important, but we need to focus more on character because our conduct flows from our character, just as our characters are formed over time by our conduct. So there's a dialectical relationship here, but we need to emphasize more on virtue. And this goes against the grain of much ethical theory, which typically focuses on duties and consequences. Charles Taylor, a contemporary philosopher and ethicist, puts it this way: the dominant philosophical ethics today, this is from a book of his published in 2007 called The Secular Age, divided into the two major branches, utilitarianism and post-Kantianism, those approaches. So again, consequences and duties. Both of these schools conceive of morality as determining through some criterion what an agent ought to do. They're rather hostile to an ethics of virtue or the good, such as that of Aristotle. End quote from Charles Taylor's book, A Secular Age. So yes, we need to be concerned about duties and rights and consequences, but I think we ought to focus more on what kind of person should I be, on virtues. Second point here, my reason for adopting a virtue ethics approach is quite simple. What we do depends on who we are. Doing, I think, is contingent on being. To a large extent, our actions arise from our desires and affections, our dispositions and inclinations. In short, our character. My friend and colleague, Jamie Smith at Calvin University, puts it well in his book, Imagining the Kingdom. That's the quote on the slide. He writes, much of our action is not the fruit of conscious deliberation. Instead, much of what we do grows out of our passional orientation to the world, affected by all the ways we've been primed to perceive the world. In short, our action emerges from how we imagine the world. What we do is driven by who we are, the kind of person we have become. So much ethical theory, Jamie would say, and I agree, has failed to notice or understand the pre-reflective and pre-conscious basis of our action, including our moral action. So while rational reflection is important, I'm a philosopher and theologian by training, a scholar, and it's important that we use our brains and reflect and think a lot. But the simple fact is that most of our actions are pre-reflective and pre-conscious, the result of having some sort of embodied feel for the world, a kinesthetic way of being in the world shaped over time by habits, rituals, and routines. And if you want to learn more about that, Jamie's trilogy of books, Desiring the Kingdom, Imagining the Kingdom, etc., is a good place to start. The third point here is that the kind of person we have become depends on the stories we identify with. I'm quoting from Jamie again. We need stories like we need food and water. We're built for narrative. Stories shape our character, and thus all human action is shaped in terms of narratively formed character. Another quote from Jamie, same book. That shaping of our character is to a great extent the effect of stories that have captivated us, that have sunk into our bones, stories that, quote, picture what we think life is about and what constitutes, quote, the good life, unquote. We live into, same quote from Jamie, we live into the stories we've absorbed. We become characters in the drama that has captivated us. Or as prominent Scottish longtime philosopher, ethicist Alistair MacIntyre succinctly puts it, I can only answer the question, second quote on your screen, the question, what am I to do? I can only answer that question if I can answer the prior question of what story or stories do I find myself a part? And these stories, he goes on to say, are not husks that can be shucked to get the kernels inside, but are indispensable to knowing who we are. Duke Divinity School ethicist Stanley Hauerwas reminds us, I quote, we do not tell stories simply because they provide us a more colorful way to say what can be said in a different way, but because there is no other way we can articulate the richness of intentional activity. That is, behavior that is purposeful, but not necessary. In other words, there is, to put it succinctly, a narrative quality to human action. The best place to go to this point, I think, is the work of Paul Ricoeur, French theologian philosopher. I studied with Ricoeur in my PhD work at the University of Chicago. His books, 3 volumes, Time and Narrative, outline this quite well. So virtue is a narratively formed, praiseworthy character trait. Because we're shaped by competing narratives, we find ourselves living in a world of competing understandings of what virtuous living looks like. To take a simple example, one strand of folk wisdom states that cleanliness is next to godliness. But what exactly is cleanliness? What is a clean home? That depends on what narrative most profoundly shapes that home. An American family shaped by 1950s medically inspired preoccupation with germs and sanitation, kind of home I grew up in, will have a different idea of cleanliness from a family that comes from Belize or New Zealand in the 2020s. Indeed, remember, Jesus found himself in a lot of trouble over the matter of cleanliness because he understood the story of the Jewish covenant quite differently than the Pharisees. So we may all agree that it's good to be clean, but the story we indwell, often without knowing it or realizing it, will give us different understandings of what that actually means. Fourth point here, virtues are shaped not only by narratives, but by practices. Stanley Hauerwas and his colleague David Burrell in their book, Why Narrative, put it this way. In allowing ourselves to adopt and be adopted by a particular story, we are in fact assuming a set of practices that will shape the ways we relate to our world and destiny. With the indwelling of a particular story comes a particular set of practices, communal embodied rhythms and routines that shape and mold our dispositions, whether virtuous or vicious. In other words, the big stories we hear, meta-narrative is the fancy term for that, and with which we identify, such as manifest destiny, material prosperity, crazy carpenter from Nazareth, these shape our character by enlisting us to engage in certain practices. For example, reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, shopping at the mall, saying the Lord's Prayer. These practices shape the kind of person we become, our virtues and vices, and hence the actions we engage in. And sometimes we see practices embodied in a person who displays for us what a life of virtue concretely looks like. For example, a well-known saint such as Mother Teresa of Calcutta, or a well-loved if unknown relative like Uncle John or Aunt Susan, which is why I asked you to start today by thinking of a person in your life, listing those character traits of that person. And I suspect we can all name people we personally know, I hope, or know about at least, whose lives serve as examples of virtue to us. These people are ethical exemplars or models of virtue who inspire us to live such a life ourselves. So stories and practices shape our character. But fifth, furthermore, our practices over time color the way we see ourselves and the world. So there's a connection between virtue and vision. Gilbert Meilander, a Lutheran ethicist, states, what duties we perceive and even what dilemmas may depend upon what virtues shape our vision of the world, end quote. We see the world differently depending on how we've been formed by the virtues that constitute our character. C.S. Lewis captures this point well, I think, in one of the books in the Chronicles of Narnia. It's book 6, The Magician's Nephew. The creation of Narnia, let me give you some background here. The creation of Narnia by Aslan looks and feels very different for Uncle Andrew than it does for the children. While the children find Narnia alluring and understand the words spoken by the animals, Uncle Andrew shrinks back in fear and hears only barking and howling from the animals. Indeed, because of his evil character, his viciousness, he is blind to what the children see, and therefore he misconstrues both Aslan, the creator, and Narnia, what is created. The narrator comments at one point, and this is the quote you have on the screen, "For what you see and hear depends a good deal on where you are standing. It also depends on what sort of person you are," end quote. What you see and hear, what you and I see and hear depends on our character. So the sixth and last point here in this brief overview of virtue ethics and virtue ethics. In summary, this is a virtue, I think, a story-shaped, praiseworthy character trait formed by practices over time that disposes us to act in certain ways, certain good ways. It's a habitual disposition to act with excellence, to borrow that brief definition from Aristotle, molded by the narrative or narratives we identify with and in which we dwell. So we know what's truly good and how to live well by soaking in certain narratives of particular communities with their corresponding practices, and by looking to people of virtue as role models. Now, if you want a deeper dive on this, my most recent book is Earthkeeping and Character, Exploring a Christian Ecological Virtue Ethics, came out a year ago with Baker Academic. Here is the overview, Ecological Ethics Reframed, where again, I argue along with a number of other Christian philosophers, theologians, ethicists, that we need to spend more time focusing on aretiology, virtue ethics, as well as deontology and teleology. I talk about virtue and vice in the opening chapter, and then focus in on a number of particular, in this case, 8 in particular, 8 what I call ecological virtues. Living with amazement and modesty, focusing on wonder and humility. Living with strength of mind and discernment, focusing on self-control and wisdom, 2 of the cardinal virtues. Living with respect and care, focusing on justice and love, which show up all throughout the Christian tradition and in virtually every other religious tradition I'm aware of. Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, etc. And finally, living with fortitude and expectation, courage and hope. Chapter 6, digging in, becoming a person of character, talk about the various ways in which we become people of certain character. And then the appendix gives a brief survey of the discipline of Christian environmental virtue ethics. Ever so briefly, let me just focus in on a couple examples to flesh out this rather skeleton-like outline. The virtue of ecological wonder, the settled disposition to stand in rapt attention and enthralled amazement in the presence of the awe-inspiring natural world. Formed by this virtue, we have the ability to see, appreciate, and be amazed by features of the natural world. The astounding vastness of the Grand Canyon and the quiet closeness of a dense forest trail. the breathtaking beauty of a giant sequoia, and the remarkable biochemistry of a pitcher plant. The biomechanics of a ruby-throated hummingbird hovering on the feeder outside the kitchen window, and the tender care of your beloved dog nursing young pups in the backyard. I'm giving you just a bit from page 44 of my book where I talk about this virtue. The vice of deficiency, not having enough of this, is what I call insensibility, the disposition to be indifferent or deaf to the wonders of the world. No night sky, however beautiful, can move us if we have this vice. Move us to slack-jawed wonder. No orchid display, no dancing sandhill crane, no acrobatic dusky dolphin can bring us to marvel and be amazed. To the ecologically insensible, the natural world is flat, uniform, monochrome. The asses of modernity or the suspicions of postmodernity have drained our ability to wonder from those who exhibit this, the ability to wonder from those who exhibit this vice. The vices of excess is what I call hyper astonishment, the disposition toward misplaced amazement. And for the sake of time, I think I'll just move on, give you a couple examples. This is me in the green parka, picture taken by a co-instructor on not the most recent May term, but a May term course that I teach in the Adirondacks of the upstate New York. This is in the high peaks on a morning with a group of students as we're looking out and with utter amazement and wonder at the view from this particular mountaintop. The virtue of ecological humility, the settled disposition to act in such a way that we know our place and fit harmoniously within it, whether that's our local community, our bioregion, or our home planet. If ecologically humble, we acknowledge that we are finite and fallen, and thus have an honest and accurate estimation of our abilities and capacities. This requires not only self-knowledge and knowledge of the world in which we live, but also awareness of the limits of our knowledge. We frankly acknowledge our limited ability to know the future consequences of our actions. And we have an honest awareness of our penchant for self-deception. Before making decisions, we survey as many consequences as possible. We explore alternatives. We seek out blind spots. We consider worst-case scenarios. If ecologically humble, we act cautiously. The vice of deficiency here is arrogance or overweening pride, a disposition to overestimate our abilities and thus be vain and boastful, thinking humans are at the center of the universe. Ecological arrogance puts us cocky and confident at the center of the universe. And so, thinking we know everything, we cut corners with that wildlife conservation program. Despite the manifest evidence of both unforeseen and unintended consequences and our own ignorance, we go too fast when working on that water reclamation project. Assuming the only value of some animal, plant, or place is its usefulness for us, we put a price tag on quote unquote environmental resources according to their quote unquote economic utility. Because of our individual and collective arrogance, the natural world of which we humans are an integral part suffers. The vice of excess here I call self-deprecation, the disposition to downplay the important role we humans have as caretakers of creation. If captured by this vice, we undervalue the important place of humans as caretakers and responsible agents of change for the good. Sometimes we talk as if the world would be better off without us. We fail to see how we humans have a legitimate and significant role to play in caring for the earth. So here's a May term group, whitewater rafting, the upper Hudson River. That's me, third from the right, going through a class 4 rapid. We got a good guide in the back, but boy, there's nothing, almost nothing more humbling than being bounced around on a whitewater river in this case, praying that no one becomes a, quote, swimmer, a euphemism in that business for people who are involuntarily ejected from the raft, and you got to haul them back in. Virtue of ecological courage, a couple more examples real quick. Virtue of ecological courage is moral strength. When fearful about potential ecological losses, and in steadfast endurance in the face of seemingly intractable ecological problems. The vice of deficiency here is cowardice or faint-heartedness, the inability or unwillingness to act when some ecological good is at risk or some non-human creature or place is in peril. The vice of excess here is recklessness, fearlessness that prompts us to foolishly charge ahead without doing our necessary homework. So courage, this is another slide from climbing the high peaks in the Adirondacks, upstate New York. It's about that steep. It's not rock climbing. There's no, we were not rock climbing this day, didn't need our climbing gear, but it was a steep slope above tree line. And for some of my students, it required a good bit of fortitude and courage. The virtue of ecological hope, the settled disposition to yearn for and act to bring about some good future. In Christian terms, this is God's good future of shalom, of peace and flourishing for all the earth. The vice of deficiency here is despair or the abandonment of belief in the possibility of any good future. The vice of excess is presumptuousness or an overconfidence that presumes something or someone will save us, and therefore we need do nothing. Some scientific breakthrough, this is presumptuousness, or newfangled technology will extricate us from the shortage of potable water to drink or the scarcity of clean air to breathe. Or some new political leader or educational guru will bring in the future we hope for, so we don't have to do anything. It's all on them. If we fall victim to this vice, we fail to realize that there are pretenders to hope in our increasingly anxious world. We may be taken in by prophets, PHETS, of easy credibility, or presume that ecological healing will be pain-free or will not demand much from us. In any of these cases, we overconfidently assume that all will be well with the world, whether we do anything or not. Here are two happy campers. Their hope for that day has now been realized. They are dry, they are warm, they are well fed, and snug as a bug, two bugs in a rug here in their mummy sleeping bags. There we have a lean-to to stay dry out from the rain. And it may not be a kind of ecological hope I was just describing, but I couldn't resist this slide of realized hope in the lives of these two Hope College May-term students. Well, much more could be said, but that's, I hope, enough to stimulate a little bit of further discussion. We've got a few minutes left. This is a slide from Camp Fowler, Reformed Church in America Camp and Retreat Center in the Adirondacks. I wish every night looked like that, but here we have it. Influence of humans, we have Adirondack chairs in the foreground. In the background, Sagandaga Lake with the beautiful sunset off in the distance. Any comments or questions in the remaining few minutes before I conclude with another Wendell Berry poem?
Steve, hi, it's Gene. I found, I mean, obviously this is fascinating. I think challenge, if you're talking to someone who, for whatever reason it is, because of their background, because of political affiliations, have a very different view on the ecology and ecological ethics, protecting the environment, I guess it becomes and we talked about like the deficiencies and self-centeredness and everything like that. I mean, how do you, I mean, almost in a sense, you're presenting them and saying, you know, your view is very self-centered and deficient. I mean, that's what the conclusion would be. So how do you navigate that in a conversation? If you're trying to win someone over to change their mind, it kind of reminds me of the old 1950s type of preaching, where, you know, it's hellfire coming down on you sinners. How do you navigate that?
It's a great question. And I would probably start by saying, hey, let's go take a walk. And I'd get them outside and ask them about, any birds you recognize or trees, or if there's a garden nearby. I would try to find some common ground, so to speak, behaviorally. I mean, I wouldn't start by trotting out arguments from chapter 7 of my book, For the Beauty of the Earth, for why you ought to be an earthkeeper. I'd try to find some common ground. This person presumably breathes, presumably, drinks liquids like water, presumably hopes for his or her future, and the future, if he or she is married and has children, that the world that those children and maybe grandchildren occupy will be at least as good, if not better, than the one we inherit. That's one of the principles I have on my matron course. We leave wherever we go in at least as good a shape, if not better, than when we found it. So I wouldn't trot out an argument or talk a whole lot. I would try to find some common ground on things we share together. Like, again, clean air. I have my students in one of my classes, raise your hand if you breathe, well, all hands go up, and raise your hand if you had water today to drink, and use that as an entree to say that, we share this home planet. We've got to figure out ways that we can care for it together. Will we agree on every detail? No, but that shouldn't be an obstacle in the way of helping us see that we need to do a better job than we're currently doing. I have students identify ecological degradations in their home communities, wherever they're from. None of them have any difficulty doing that, unfortunately. They talk about air pollution if they live in some big city somewhere, or groundwater contamination, or issues like that. So again, regardless of their political party affiliation or anything like that, I try to get them to see that we share common ground, and especially with Christians. And there I go to the Bible, and do you know the Bible begins and ends with rivers and trees? No one knows that. I've never heard a sermon or had a class where they look carefully at Genesis 1 and 2 and Revelation 21 and 22. So, and all the other texts in between. So I directly appeal, if I'm dealing with Christians, and especially Christians who are evangelicals like me, self-identify as people who take the Bible seriously, for example. Well, let's take a look and see what the Bible has to say about what it means to be a caretaker of creation. So, and that way I kind of call their bluff. If they say that the Bible is important in one way or another, let's say, okay, then we ought to take seriously our call to serve, protect, and restore, Genesis 2:15, the world in which we live. Great question. Time for maybe one more? John's got me on a short leash here. We're supposed to end at 1. And again, I do have another poem, but it's short. Like all of Wendell's best poems, I think, are his short ones. But one more question, if there is one, or comment.
I was gonna say, so for me, I always have this personal conflict with people who want to go to the top of the mountain really fast on a hike. And I'm the person who's always very slow and patient. And I'm like, oh, look at this caterpillar, look at this flower. And I know that people enjoy the creation in different ways. But when you were talking about that hyper astonishment, I'm just not sure if there's this adrenaline rush that comes with the creation where maybe people aren't enjoying it the way they should, like rock climbing. I don't know, or is there really a spectrum in how we enjoy the creation? It's not always it could have that adrenaline rush to it or something.
Yeah, it's a great question, Veronica. It depends. My point, I didn't have time to talk about it with the hyper astonishment. You know, people say, "Oh, I'm really, really astonished at something that doesn't appear to be very much worthy of that astonishment." You know, that's what I was getting at there, being astonished about the wrong things, maybe. Um, but you know, we have different things that sort of draw out our wonder. My goal there is simply to say we need to cultivate a sense of astonishment or wonder for things we often take for granted in the natural world. One way I learned long ago when I was leading wilderness trips professionally to try to keep your group together is to, after a few hours of hiking, when maybe the group splits off, people who want to walk faster in the front, slower in the back, I'll ask one of the people who's in the back, maybe a slower walker, to go up front and say, no one can go past the front person. It slows the group down, and actually the person in front probably ends up hiking a little faster. But also for that person who wants to stop and identify that mushroom or that flower, everyone has to stop. And we can't continue until that person decides we go on. So you'll pull out the books, you key the flower or the whatever you see, and it helps build, I think, a little bit of more of a culture of curiosity. This isn't a hike where we have to get anywhere fast. Presumably that's the case, and slows people down and makes them pay more attention to the flora and the fauna around them. But it depends on what your goals are, what the nature of the hike is, and what the people are there to learn. But cultivating any kind of wonder, I mean, it takes some time, because often, we got to get to point A to point B, and we're just hiking along and not paying attention to, oh, look at that trillium down there. I always make, the group stop the first day we're out. The trillium are blooming typically when I'm in the Adirondacks, for example, in my matron course. And we always stop and get some pictures. We ask people, what do you know about trillium? Why does it have that name? All the threes. And someone who's a botanist in the group typically gives them a chance then to teach. It's not just on me to do all that stuff. Biology student maybe will have a chance to wax eloquent about something we see. So that's just a little tip I learned long ago when we're out hiking, when it comes to slowing the group down so people can actually pay attention to what's around them. I should conclude because my clock is telling me here it's 1 o'clock here in Holland, Michigan. So let me just conclude with, again, a short Wendell Berry poem. This also is from his collection, This Day, Collected in New Poems, Sabbath Poems. The clearing rests in song and shade. It is a creature made by old light held in soil and leaf, by human joy and grief, by human work, fidelity of sight and stroke, by rain, by water on the parent stone. We join our work to heaven's gift, our hope to what is left, that field and woods at last agree in an economy of widest worth. High heaven's kingdom come on earth. Imagine paradise, O dust, arise. The clearing rests in song and shade, he says, because of this combination of human joy and grief, of human work, but also of rain and water. So we join, he writes, we join our work as caretakers to heaven's gift, God's gift. Our hope that field and woods at last agree in an economy of widest worth, when high heaven's kingdom comes on earth. So, O dust, that's us, Adam from the Adamah, earth creature from the earth. Arise, exclamation point, he ends. In other words, humans, get after it. You're calling to work with God's gift to make for an economy of widest worth. So we have a lot of work to do. We, of Christian Earthkeepers, and organizations like the Au Sable Institute and many others. Again, thank you for this opportunity to think together about some important matters. Hope we all are able to continue to support the work of Au Sable and John and his colleagues there. And God's blessings to each of you, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for doing this. I greatly appreciate it. And as people leave, feel free to take yourself off mute if you want and say thanks to Steve. You all have my email. So if you want to get a hold of me, feel free to do so. If you have other ideas, if these types of kind of short online Zoom sessions are things you'd like to do more of, I'd like to do a session just on that last slide, Steve, on courage and hope, living with fortitude and exception, or expectation. We could talk for a long time just about that one thing. So
yeah.
Anyhow, again, thank you for doing this. Thanks everyone for joining us.